Give you an update on the historic district that we're trying to get designated here. It's not the first historic district in Toano. And to explain that, let me go back to 2019 when the state of Virginia approved the designation of a historic district, Toano Commercial Historic District, that celebrates, identifies and celebrates all those commercial buildings along the north side of the road, on the opposite side of the road. And that nomination for that historic district told the story of Toano's esse as a commercial center in western James City County, and some would argue kind of for the whole county. I've been in Williamsburg for many years, but Williamsburg was kind of slowing down a little bit during those years, and Toano was on the rise. And so that initial historic district sort of tells a story on that side of the road, but years later it seems important to tell the story on this side of the road. What was the community life that's behind and sustaining all those storefronts, all that activity across the road? What's the story of the community itself? And so in order to tell that story, an expansion of that original historic district was proposed and ultimately approved by the Department of Historic Resources. When I say approved, that means as the gatekeepers, they said they can either say yes, you can do it, or don't waste your time. And so we got yes, you can do it out of them. And so the next thing, the next step in this process has been to decide what buildings go into that expanded district. And Jack had a list, and I added some to that. And the folks in Richmond said, because it's unusual to expand a district like this, we need to be involved in setting out the boundaries and deciding what buildings are going to be in this. And so we've been a number of months in that process, negotiating and proposing and counter-proposing. But I think we've arrived at a consensus on what should be in that expanded historic district. We're going to add some buildings, obviously, and let me just go out to the west end of town here. And if you come back this way from Greystone Manufacturing, the factory there are two big white houses there on the left side of the road as you're coming back toward Toano. Those are going to be included, the Marsden House and the Gauden House. On the opposite side of the road, as you're coming around that curve, like you're going to Richmond, and you start that big curve to go to Richmond, on your left there's a kind of a Dutch colonial house right almost in the ditch, right by the highway, and that's 8003, and that was the Jennings house. It was built in 1934, and I had no idea, but I learned that John Jennings, the director of the Virginia Historical Society, grew up in that house. And Toano attracted a lot of very interesting people and created and contributed a lot of very interesting people to our society, a lot of leaders, a lot of important leaders. So this is a town with an amazing story. The National Register nominations don't give you much opportunity to beat the drums about that, but I'm going to try. Because there's some really good stuff that we need to tell in the story about this town. So at that end of the town, we're adding some buildings out there. And of course, closer to the middle of town, this is getting added. Because this side of the road was largely destroyed in the VDOT visitation, I'll call it. Most of the attention was on that side, but this and the Travers House survive. So this is very important institution in the community's history. And the Travers House, Elmer Travers, was an African-American auto mechanic. He owned a repair shop right on the road. And back in that time, black folks tended to live back on the side roads. They weren't much out. When you look at the census, they're not out on Route 60 or Richmond Road. They're back on those side roads. Elmer Travers was out on that main road, and he's a guy with a trade, and he had the respect of the community. He was a stalwart member of the community, and he was out there on Richmond Road dipping his beak in that river of commerce that was Route 60. So that building is very important to me. Next time you go to Holes, I want you to look at the chimney, and there are 4 terracotta pipes coming out of that chimney. That each one of those had a stove hooked to it, and there were 4 stoves and 4 rooms in a pinwheel around that chimney. And so that was the Travers residence, and it included that little series of windows across the back there. So that's another building with kind of an unexpected and interesting story. At the other end of town, we're going to include the house with a chair in front of it. That's the Lightfoot Richardson house. He was sheriff. And then across the road, and this was one of the things that was negotiated with DHR, including the Sheldon Lumber Company tract. Now Roper Investments, I believe, and Virginia Hardwood Mulch. And so there's some buildings out on that tract that date from the Sheldon Lumber Company period. And Jack showed me a photograph from 1959 that included some of those buildings. Some of those buildings are still there today. So DHR really wanted to include that. And Jack told me about playing on a sawdust pile behind that thing. And I think that pile's in the photo, Jack. And it's also on the USGS quad map for Toano. It's on there. It shows on the Tobo map. Amazing. So that's what's going to get added at the other end of town. And then south of the town, let's see, this way, is the Toano Terrace suburb. That was laid out in 1915 by a man named Thomas P. Hammer from Philadelphia. He had lumber interests down in North Carolina and was a railroad executive down there, but he was really out of Philadelphia and obviously looking for investment opportunities. And here was this tract of land, a nice flat buildable terrace of land, and why not call it Toano Terrace? And he did. And that was laid out in 1915. In November of that year, I think it's either 15 or 16, half of the lots transferred in one day. And a lot of prominent families went in and bought multiple lots, possibly as investments, but also maybe to make a nice setting for a large, nice house. And the Martin House is one of those. The Sneed House, it's a bungalow that's down School Lane. It's 122 School Lane, I believe, is the Sneed House, the Dr. Sneed House. And I told Jack, man, if that ever comes for sale, it's mine. It's mine. You're not getting it. It's a great house. That was one in the census. That's the best house in Toano in the census. I think it's the 1930 census. And so I've been doing deed work on these houses. I've been doing work on identifying the individuals, and Jack and Mr. Bolt have been just great with that. And everything that they've written in Toano Times and Toano Center of Commerce and all those works of history have been very, very helpful in creating a kind of paper trail for this town that makes it a lot easier for somebody like me to come along behind and kind of scoop it all up. And so because we're writing about a different kind of building now, commercial buildings over here, now we're talking about domestic architecture. And so domestic architecture responds to the economy, who's got money and when. And it didn't take off right away. The first buildings weren't built until about 1922. And then you have the interwar period where there's some things going on, and then World War II comes. And so after the war, then things kind of ramp up again. And so the result is we have this kind of interesting, almost like a museum collection of houses from all these different periods that speak to all the different trends in architecture at the time. There's one ranch house that's basically a ranch house that was built for Mrs. Barksdale, wasn't it? And it's got sort of a sawtooth clear story skylight on it. And that stuff is going on out in California at Big Sur and places like that. It's real fashionable stuff, but here it is showing up on the East Coast in Toano. And so every one of these styles, as you move through American history, the Queen Anne style, and you've got the plain style, of course, that shows up. That's just basically a box with weatherboards and trim. But you also have the Queen Anne period, and that would be the Fahrenholt house and the Dr. Stevenson house, and others. And so there's a very rich collection of buildings here that speak to the economic conditions of the community at various times, and also as the prosperity of Americans expands, they have greater expectations about domestic comfort, and these houses begin to tell that story, that you start out with a detached garage, and then the garage gets attached to the house, and then the house gets, extra rooms. You get all these things that are added to that ranch house, which is basically built on a single axis. It's just like a telescope. You just keep pulling it out and adding rooms to it that you need. So there's a story about each of these kinds of houses to be told. And while we're waiting on boundaries from DHR, and while we're waiting on designating numbers for all the buildings to be added, we're writing about these buildings, writing about the history of domestic building, of domestic architecture in Toano. So that's sort of where we are. I think we have reached consensus on boundaries and buildings. And so any day I'm hoping that Joanna McKnight's going to pick up the phone and say, okay, May Tilley's got all the numbers assigned and you're ready to go. So that's my hope. And I'm trying to retire, and I can't do that until I get you guys to the finish line. So I'm determined. I'm a determined person. So thank you so much for listening to me tonight.